Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio with another project today for the On30 Goldfield and Calico model railroad. This is my Mojave Desert themed 1920s era narrow gauge layout with just a little bit of Knott's Berry Farm on the side. And today I want to pick up right about where we left off last time after installing this new section of backdrop behind the town of Calico. I want to build a tunnel that separates the onstage parts of the layout from the backstage staging yard. I want to model it inside and out because a lot of the interior of the tunnel is going to be visible. And I'm going to take you with me every step of the way. And so the first thing I want to do is paint that area of track with some Rust-Oleum dark brown camo. That's because it'll be a lot easier to access it now than it will be after the tunnel is built. Painting with dark brown camo is a good first step. It's a great color for simulating rusty old iron. But there's a couple of more things I want to do here to make this track look a little bit more realistic. And I've got some granite gray here and some territorial beige from Apple Barrel. I'm just going to mix those together a little bit, and I've got a stiff brush here and some corrugated cardboard. Get about 90% of the paint off. And we'll just dry brush that onto the ties. And that's really going to bring out the cast-in wood grain detail here, along with the rail spikes. And some of these that are out here in the sun, I want them to be a little bit more gray, a little bit more faded. Now, it's usually very damp inside of tunnels, even in the desert. So I want to have some rust indicated on the rails. I'm going to use my pan pastels for that. That's the best thing I've found for doing this. And this is a dark rust. I like to apply that first. Just hitting the sides of the rail here and the tops of the spikes. And then I like to come back with the lighter rust color. Just go over it again. Hit it in a few spots here and there. Right now, I want to hit it with some clear matte finish. Now with this dry, I want to take some of my odorless mineral spirits and one of my track cleaners and clean the paint and pastels off the top of the rails. I like to do this as I go after each step because a lot of gunk is going to build up on here. And I want to make sure the trains still run, you know. Dip that in there. Just run that across the rail head till it's shiny again. Well, now with the track painted, I'm ready to start on the tunnel itself. And I've decided I want it to be basically a rock tunnel, something that was blasted through solid rock without a lot of timber framing on the inside. But I do want timber framing on the opening or the tunnel portal. And for that, I've got some O-scale 12x12s that I'm cutting to length, and I've drawn a little template here to help out with construction and make it a little bit easier. So I've drawn what is really a very basic tunnel portal here that's going to be 16 feet tall and 13 feet wide, a couple of diagonal braces. And I think to make construction a lot easier, I'm going to glue this up on a piece of foam core. I've got a scrap right here. So I'll coat the back of this with Super 77 spray adhesive. Now I can just cut this out. I'll take and put some clear tape over the top of my lines, so that when I'm gluing the pieces up, they won't stick to the paper. So I want to build two of these frames, and each one's going to need these two 4-inch long pieces, one 3 3/4-inch piece, and then the angled corner braces. And I think the easiest way to proceed is to measure them out and cut them over on my bandsaw. Now, if you don't have a bandsaw, don't worry. You can cut it with a razor saw. I just find I get a little bit more accurate cuts this way. I'll take my razor saw blade and distress all of these pieces a little bit. Now I can get some stain on all of these pieces with my shoe dye and a rubbing alcohol mixture. And we'll set all those pieces aside to dry for a few minutes and we'll be ready for some assembly. Okay, now with the stain dry, I'm going to use some double stick tape on here, right over the other tape I added earlier. And that should make building these pretty quick and easy. Lay them right on top of the tape, line them up with my lines. Use some yellow carpenter's glue. Is that the shorter one? Yeah. Lay that top beam across, and the tape will hold it in place. By the way, I should probably mention I'm not modeling any specific prototype here. This is my own design based on, a lot of different tunnels that I've looked at and researched. These tunnel portals were usually engineered in place, for the specific site. It wasn't really much of a standardized design other than the height and the width for the locomotive and the cars to clear. My primary goal here is just to have a portal that's sufficiently railroady and interesting looking. Now I have some side retaining wall pieces that I've laser cut. These boards would be about 3 by 12. Another thing I always like to do on the ends of these boards, these are going to show, so I'm going to take and cut all the way through where the scribe ends, so that from the end they will look like individual boards. Another technique I discovered kind of by accident when I dribbled some stain across some wood is you take a loaded brush like this and just tap it. You see the little dots landing there? Little dark spots of stain, and those are going to look like knot holes or stains or imperfections in the wood. Now I can pop this off of here. We can start putting this whole thing together. Get some glue along this edge, and that goes right here like that. What I'm trying to show here is sort of some square set timber framing, which is a technique that was brought over to the United States by Cornish miners, used extensively in underground mines and also used in railroad tunnels. There would have been mortise and tenon joinery on all of these joints in real life, but I'm not going to model that part because it doesn't show. That would just be crazy. Make sure we get glue on all of these mating surfaces. One thing I know that'll help to keep this square is putting the roof on now. I'll go ahead and glue the other side on. Now I've got this footer piece, goes right there, and a long diagonal brace. Frame those boards in. And I've got these short upright pieces. Just go right about there. And then I want to add an additional layer of 12 by 12 bracing just around the opening here. So that's going to kind of sandwich those boards in between the two 12 by 12s. Now I want to position this right about here, and we'll run a couple of trains through here to make sure everything clears properly. This is the longest car that I'm going to be running. See if it makes that without having any clearance issues. Yeah, no problem. Good. So the idea here now is to glue this into place, and then I can build up the rest of the tunnel and the scenery around it. So now I've begun sculpting some chunks of 2-inch thick XPF foam to fit precisely around my tunnel portal and create both the hillside and the interior of the tunnel. Let me show you exactly how I'm doing that. First, I take a couple of quick measurements so I can cut a chunk of foam to the size I need. That looks like about 2 3/4 by 7 1/4. Then I come over here to my bandsaw and cut out a blank to match those dimensions. Next, I want to mark it and cut it to match the angle of the backdrop as it relates to the angle of the tunnel portal. It sounds complicated, but it's a little easier than you might think. I just need to line this up with the edge of the tunnel portal here and one corner hitting the backdrop. Then put a straight edge right across there, draw a line, and that's my angle to cut. Now I've marked this back 1/4 inch here so that the tunnel portal will be inset into the rock. Now I just need to cut out an allowance for that 12 by 12 beam that's on the outside. And now I've got a piece of foam that should fit perfectly right here. Now I can outline or trace that angle right there and remove a lot of this material, and I'll probably use the hot wire cutter for that. Then I can carve and break away a little bit more material with my hobby knife, make this look more like rock, and add some texture and strata with my wire brush. Then on the interior of the tunnel, same thing. Took my wire brush, want this to look like it was blasted out of solid rock, so I'm going to dig in there, here and there a little bit. Then when I'm happy with the way that looks, use my heat gun, freeze that texture in place. Perfect. Now the next piece is a lot easier because I can just trace the outline of this piece onto another chunk of foam. Now I can take this off all as one piece, use my wire brush here at the joints, make sure everything blends together nicely. Now I'm working on the top piece, and this piece has to do a couple of things. One, it has to form the roof of the tunnel, but it also needs to provide a transition here into this scenery that's going to be built to the left. So as I carve this away with the hot wire cutter, I'm doing my best to try to match this slope that I've indicated here on the backdrop so everything blends together nicely. I'm also cutting away a little bit of material here at the roof of the tunnel so I can detail that to make it look like rock. And now I want to just keep building up the layers. Okay, I'm pretty happy with the way this is looking so far. So now it's time to turn my attention to the other half of the tunnel, which will be located behind the backdrop. Once again, use the wire brush and the heat gun. Then I can use that as a pattern for the next piece. Okay, now for the other side. Now I've cut a blank for the roof of the tunnel, and I'm going to attach it temporarily with some 3-inch long drywall screws. The idea here is that I'll be able to lift the whole thing off, and then I can mark and then carve the roof of the tunnel. Now I don't really need to detail the roof of the tunnel. I mean, it's not something a lot of people are going to see, but unless they're short, you know, unless they're kids or really want to get up there and look. And, you know, I don't want them to be disappointed with a blank roof, right? I'm going to carve a little bit of this out and make it look like rock like the rest of it. Now I can put the whole thing together. That goes there. That goes there. That goes on top. I'm going to glue the lid onto the tunnel, but the tunnel itself is not going to be attached to the layout deck. That way I'll be able to lift the whole thing off and clean and maintain the track if I need to. Now I want to fill in these little gaps between the layers of foam. And I've used a lot of different things to do that over the years. I've used Sculpting, I've used spackle, joint compound. All of those work well. But this time out, I'm going to use this Woodland Scenics Flex Paste. I've got a big jar of this left over from when I did the Christmas layout last year, and I thought I'd give it a try on here. It's basically just vinyl spackling compound with a different name on it, so I think it should work pretty well. And the reason I haven't glued any of these pieces down yet is because now I can just take them off of here, take them over to the workbench, and finish them there without messing up my tunnel portal. So I've got my flex paste, a little bit of water, stiff paintbrush, a couple of palette knives. I'll just go at this. Stuff dries pretty fast too, about 40 minutes. Of course, they recommend that you put it on in thinner coats. You want to build it up in layers, put it on about 1/16 of an inch thick at a time, and then let that dry and put on another coat afterwards. As it starts to harden, I can go back and texture it a little bit more, make it blend with the rock better. I'm just stippling it with the brush here to give it a little bit of texture. This stuff is non-toxic and water soluble, and you can clean up with soap and water before it dries. Once it dries, it's going to be waterproof. You'll be able to paint it. Of course, I want to do the interior of the tunnel also. Okay, I think that's dry enough now that I can get some paint on all of these pieces. I'm going to start with my scenic base color, and if you watched my previous video on the backdrop, putting in the backdrop for Calico, this is the same color I used on that. In fact, I'll be using all the same colors, so it blends in perfectly with the backdrop. I just want to get a nice even coat on all of the parts that are going to show, the inside and outside of the tunnel. Well, I gave these a couple hours, and I think they're sufficiently dry now that I can move on with the next step, and that's to go over all of the pieces with a dark wash. And this is ivory black and burnt umber acrylic paint diluted with a whole bunch of water so that it's a transparent wash. And I just want it to get back into all of the cracks and crevices, darken those up. That's going to give us a much more realistic look to the rock work when all is said and done. You know, when it goes on, it's going to look really, really super dark, but don't worry, that's not the final look. Now, to finish up the painting on this rock work, I've got just 3 colors here. I've got some unbleached titanium, which is a nice, very light tan, warm white, somewhere in there, some raw sienna, and some burnt umber. And the first thing I want to do is take some of this scenic base color, and this is the stuff I have mixed up by the gallon. This is actually latex paint. And I'm going to lighten this up a shade with this unbleached titanium. I've got a sort of a semi-stiff brush here, a little bit smaller than what I use to paint most of this. And I'm going to just go over the surface like this, hitting the high spots. And if you've seen my previous rock work videos, this is all going to look very familiar. This is pretty much the way I always do it. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm just hitting the high spots on the rock. And so the lower, darker material is going to show through. So it's kind of like dry brushing, and this is really going to start to give this rocky slope some definition. Very glad I decided to do this over at the workbench. For one thing, it's keeping paint off of my tunnel portal that I built. It's a lot easier to see everything, turn it in every direction. On the deeper part of the tunnel that's going to live back behind the backdrop, I really don't need to do too much more than this. So mostly this is just going to disappear into darkness. And I'll take some of my raw sienna, put it right in there for a slightly darker shade, darker and redder. And create some streaks coming down the sides of the rock work. I'll just mix in some more of that unbleached titanium for a highlight color. Go a shade lighter again. Just indicate where sunlight is hitting the rocks. And I'm going to do more finish work on all of this over at the scene. I just wanted to get it up to a certain level before I install everything. And now I'm going to start reassembling the tunnel. In fact, I'm actually going to glue these side pieces down. Notice I'm not gluing them to the backdrop, however, because I do want the backdrop to remain removable. I'm not going to glue the top on yet because something I need to do first. And the thing I need to do is ballast the track. And for that, I'm going to be using chick grit. This is crushed granite, not to be confused with chicken grit. Chick grit is for baby chicks. If you get chicken grit, it's much, much larger. This stuff is very small. In fact, it's just the right size for O-scale ballast. I'm just going to sprinkle it on. I picked this up at my local feed store. If you don't have a local feed store near you, Amazon probably carries it. Just remember, chick grit, not chicken grit. There is a difference. And I usually just pour it down the track center line, put a little bit on the shoulders of the roadbed also. And then most of the time is spent manicuring it and positioning it with a soft paintbrush. Get it off the tops of the ties as much as I can. Ballast is supposed to be down between the ties and below the rails. Now you can see why I didn't want to put the lid on the tunnel just yet. And as for the back half of the tunnel, I'm not even going to put that on yet until I get this pretty well manicured just the way I want it. This is one of those steps that you really want to get right the first time. You don't want to have to come back and fix it later. So I really take my time. Sometimes I'll go tie by tie, one side of the rails at a time, just to make sure there's nothing up there that's going to interfere with the passing of the trains. So this is how I like my ballast to look before I glue it down. Off the tops of the ties completely, and really no higher than the bottoms of the rails. So pretty well manicured actually for a funky old narrow gauge line like this one. And to glue it all down, the first thing I want to do is completely saturate the ballast with a little bit of wet water and a spray bottle. Wet water is just regular water with a drop or two of liquid detergent in it to break the surface tension. And then I'm going to use some diluted white glue. This is just regular Elmer's glue, diluted 3:1 with water. I like to dribble it on from an old glue bottle just like this. When you see it white and pooling up like that, that's how you know you have enough glue on there. Right down the center line and then along the shoulders of the roadbed. And now we wait for that to dry. And while I'm waiting for that to dry, I can go ahead and glue this part of the hill on. I'll still be able to access most of the tunnel interior from behind. Now I can blend the top and bottom together. Just a little bit of this flex paste, and I'll come back and paint all this to match once it dries. But right now, I'm going to start work on this retaining wall up here. I want to build this in place, and I've started by laying another 12 by 12 up here. Then I've got some On30 scale ties that make up this little piece of retaining wall that I'm recycling from the last version of Calico Town. What I like about building this stuff in place is I can just press right down into the foam, get a nice fit. Now I want to have like a mongrel assortment of posts holding this back. Different sizes, have some be round, some be square. Now I want to give that retaining wall a reason to be there. I'm going to dig into my collection of real rocks and dirt. I'm going to backfill this, just kind of drop it on and let the rocks fall where they may. Some smaller rocks. I'll clean those off the track before I start gluing things down. Now I've got some lighter blonde colored sand. Mix in with that, lighten things up a little bit. Once again, a little wet water. And dribble on the diluted white glue. Now I've let everything dry overnight. I'm just going to come back with my shop vac and pick up any loose pieces of ballast or rock that might have fallen down between the rails. Now I just want to come back with my colored chalks, add a final bit of weathering and coloring to the rocks. When you put this real rock and dirt on here, a lot of times it dries a little bit darker than it originally went on. So I want to lighten it up a little bit, blend it in with the foam rock work a little bit better. The colors I'm using here is a little bit of terracotta mixed with white, just to give it that kind of blonde rock look. Now I'll take some pure black chalk, add some smoke and soot stains here at the top of the tunnel, something you always see on tunnel portals. Even though the locomotives on the Goldfield and Calico are oil-fired, you're still going to see a lot of soot built up here on the top of the tunnel. And I'll take that same black and bring it down here along the center of the track, represent soot and oil stains from passing trains. And I can also use chalks to gray down and desaturate the ballast just a little bit. Okay, that's pretty good. I hit it all with some clear matte finish. I'll just clean the railhead with some mineral spirits. Get all that glue and chalk and dirt off of there. And I think we can put the back half of the tunnel on now. Well, now I want to add some weeds and desert plants and things. Just poke into the foam with a pencil. Dab that in a little bit of Eileen's tacky glue. Push it down in there. This is some Woodland Scenics field grass I'm using here for weeds. Crummy old paintbrushes work well too. Now I want to add some ground foam here and there for some larger bushes. This is some dark green ground foam that I dusted with just a light gray spray to desaturate it a little bit. I've got a little yucca here from JTT Scenery Products, which helps to establish the Mojave Desert locale. I'm also going to be adding some Joshua trees a little bit later on, so that's going to be a whole nother video. And last but not least, I've got some prickly pear cactus here from Pegasus scale models. Well, all right, let's get a train running through here now and see how it all comes together. And that's a wrap on the tunnel project. I want to thank you all so much for joining me today for this first bit of new scenery on the On30 Goldfield and Calico. I had a lot of fun putting it all together. Of course, there's a lot more still to do on this layout. So if it's your first time here, I hope you will subscribe and hit that notification bell so YouTube will let you know when new videos are coming from Thunder Mesa Studio. In the meantime, you can also follow us over on Instagram at thunder.mesa and see the resources available on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. As always, a huge shout out and a big thank you to our Patreon members who help to make these videos possible. Until next time, Keep moving forward, my friends. Adios for now.